So we're just going to quickly recap on our last video. So I had gone over something like this, right? It was asking us to graph an equation. And so what we're going to do is we're going to take this equation here. So we're going to take y equals, so we're given factored form, negative x minus 2 and x plus 4. And it's asking for the zeros, y-intercept, and vertex. So what we're going to do is I'm going to teach you or show you almost step by step what I would do. Okay, so sorry, let me just double check that I have this all angled properly. So first step I would do is I would look to see, is it a positive or a negative? So in front, it's a negative. So we know it's going to be down. Okay, and then I'm gonna write step 1. So our very first step is to do this, but our actual step 1 that I would do would be to write our zeros. Because it's already in factored form, we can find those super easy, right? So we have this one here and this one here. And now remember, when we pull these out, the sign changes. So this would become a negative 4, and this would become a positive 2. So our zeros are going to be 2 and 4. And I like to box them because it makes things look neat. So step 2 in this process would be to find our axis of symmetry. Now remember, I had told you for the axis of symmetry, for the first part, you take your, sorry, there should be a negative. You take your zeros and add them together. So we would take our zeros, so our 2 plus negative 4, which gives us negative 2. So that's the first part of that. And then the second part is we divide by 2. So we take our negative 2 divided by regular 2, which gives us negative 1. So our axis of symmetry, which we represent as x equals, is negative 1. And I'm going to box that there. And then our step 3, what is this one? Is to find our standard form. Because our standard form is going to give us our y-intercept. So to find our standard form, we do our window method. Okay, so we take our first bracket and we do x minus 2. Our second bracket, x plus 4. Then we have x and x, so that's x squared. X times negative 2 is negative 2x. And then x times 4 is 4x. And then 4 times negative 2 is negative 8. So when we write this, we need to remember that there's a negative in front of this. So when we write it, we're going to write y equals negative and then put our standard form in the bracket. And to get our standard form, we need to add these together. So 4x minus 2x gives us 2x. So then when we write this, we write y equals negative bracket, and we go this way. So x squared plus 2x minus 8 bracket. And then what we need to do is we need to multiply each of these inside the bracket by the negative. So when we do that, we go negative, so this is technically a -1, so we would go -1 times x squared, which gives us negative x squared. And -1 times 2x gives us negative 2x. And -1 times -8 gives us plus 8. So then that is our standard format. And then what does this give us? So remember, our standard format gives us our y-intercept. So we have that here. So our y-intercept is equal to 8. And then box that one. And then we move on to step 4. And our step 4 is to find the vertex. Okay, so remember, to find the vertex, we've already found part of it. So we're going to be using the x from here because this is part of our vertex as well. So what we're going to do is we are going to take our x value and we are going to plug it into our factored form. Okay, so take our x equals -1, so our axis of symmetry, and plug it into our factored form. So when we do that, we end up with y equals, remember the negative, and then we sub our x in for the x here, so it would be -1 minus 2 bracket -1 plus 4 bracket, and then we minus, so -1 minus 2 gives us -3, and -1 plus 4 gives us +3. So we would multiply these ones first, and it's negative, and -9, and then negative, we can always put a 1 in front, so -1 times -9 gives us +9. So we now have our y value for our vertex. And then when we write our vertex, we write it x and y. So we write our -1 and 9. And then we're going to box that. So when we graph this, we now have all of our information to graph it. So let me grab a scrap piece of paper. And when we graph this, so this is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, -1, -2, -3, -4, -5, -6, -1, -2, -3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So we will now be able to graph our zeros. So our zeros are where it crosses the x-axis. So we would plot a point here, and we would plot a point at -4. And then we have the axis of symmetry. So we would go and put a dotted line down the axis of symmetry. And then we found our y-intercept. So our y-intercept was at 8. I guess I need to make this graph up at 9. And then we have our vertex at -1, so we go over -1, and we go up to 9, and we plot our point there. So we can now make our parabola. So on this side, it needs to cross through the 8, and then it needs to cross through the 2. And then on this side, bring it down. And we can now, with all of that information, graph our parabola. Yes, I know mine is not pretty, but it makes sense. Okay, so step 1, to find our zeros. Step 2, axis of symmetry. Step 3, standard form. Step 4, vertex. So now let's take a look at a word equation. Or sorry, word problem. So if we are given this word problem, so a ball is thrown upwards from a building in a parabolic path. If the ball follows this path, so I'm gonna which measures height and horizontal distance in meters, tell me everything about the path of the ball. So what key features do we know from the question? We need to convert the equation to standard form and add key features to sketch as you find them. So I would do these in the exact same steps. So I'm probably gonna write above and below so we have a little bit more space. So we know, because it's negative, that this is going to be pointing down. Okay, so our parabola is going to be pointing down. And then we know what our zeros are, right? So step 1, write our zeros. Okay, so that's what we know from the question. So step 1, find our zeros. So our zeros are, because when we pull these out, it's going to be -3 and +5. That did not look very good. 3 and 5. And we're going to box that. And then our step 2 is to find the axis of symmetry. Okay, so remember to do that. We must add these two together. So step 1 is to add -3 and 5 together. And part 2 is going to be to divide them by 2. So this gives us -3 plus 5 is 2 divided by 2, which gives us 1. So our x equals 1. Okay, so our axis of symmetry is 1. So if we're going to plot this, we can plot them as we go, or we can do it all at the end. I'm just going to do it all at the end. So then we have our step 3, which is to turn it into standard format. So we're going to do our window method. And remember, we have our negative sign in the front. So when we write that, it's going to be different. So we have our x plus 3 on the top and our x minus 5 on the bottom. And then we do x times x, which is x squared, x times 3, which is 3x, -5x, and 5 times 3, so we get -15 here. So then we're going to add these two together. So negative 5x plus 3x is going to give us negative 2x. So then we're going to write our equation, but remember we have to keep that negative there. So we're going to go y equals negative, bracket, we're going to go this way, x squared, sorry I got the hiccups, minus 2x minus 15. And then what we need to do is we need to multiply all of these by the negative sign in the front, which is going to give us, so negative times x squared is going to give us negative x squared. Negative times negative 2x squared, so a negative times a negative is a positive. So it's plus 2x. And then a negative times a negative is going to give us plus 15. So we now have our y-intercept. So our y-intercept is equal to 15. And then so our step 4 is going to be getting the vertex. So I'm just going to write it over here. So remember, we take our axis of symmetry that we just found and we plug it back into our factored form. So y equals negative x plus 3, x minus 5, and we plug this in, so it equals negative 1 plus 3, 1 minus 5, equals negative 4 minus 4, which equals negative 16, which equals 16. So we now have our y value for our vertex. So then we write our vertex, so we write it 1, comma, 16. And that's our vertex. And then we can plot everything on this graph. So this is going to be a little bit terrifying because we need 1 and 16 as our vertex. And so we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, let's say 15, 16. So it's somewhere up here is 16. And we need it at 1. So ignore that point there. So 1 and 16 is up here. So that is our vertex. And then we can plot our y-intercept, which is at 15. So it's about there. And then we have our line of symmetry, which is at 1. So it's down here. And then we have our zeros. So we have it at negative 3, 1, 2, 3 on this side. And 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 on this side. And then so we just draw our parabola down that way and down that way. So we now have all the information about the path of the ball. And it was the exact same steps that we did as here. Okay? So these questions are quite similar. So what I want you to do is I want you to practice the next ones, okay? And then double check that you got your answers right.